On this episode of the Sacred Playgrounds podcast, it's Advent, it's almost Christmas, so we're going to talk about how Jesus is coming to camp within the Christmas story. Welcome to the Sacred Playgrounds podcast, where we turn numbers into stories and data into insights. We dive deep into theology and research, paired with practical wisdom and action steps to help camping ministries thrive. I'm your host and producer, Jared Rendell, a camp enthusiast and part of the Sacred Playgrounds team. This podcast features Dr. Jake Sorensen, a scholar, author, practitioner, and the founder of Sacred Playgrounds. Be sure to subscribe, submit a question to us to be featured on the podcast, and click that support button to help make these episodes happen. Find us on Facebook and Instagram at Sacred Playgrounds or at sacredplaygrounds.com. Wonder with us what God might have in store at your Sacred Playground. Jingle, jingle, jingle. Welcome to the playground, everyone. Happy Christmas, Jake.
Happy Christmas to you,
I
Jared.
know, it feels like you're supposed to say it. Right? That's where they say that, right? Probably everywhere else.
Yeah, and happy Advent,
Happy Advent.
because this
Right.
is the Advent season of preparing for Christmas, the expectant arrival of the Christ child. There will also be a Christmas season that will take place right after the holiday itself.
You are such a good church calendar nerd and purist, even.
You know, I
Love it.
think it's important to
It is.
remember the cyclical nature of the church year. And I'm not one of those people that says you shouldn't put up Christmas decorations early, things like that.
Right.
But I mean, there probably is a time that's too early, like before Halloween, things like that. But I love getting into the Christmas spirit a little early. That's fine. And people want to do that. That's great. But I feel like that's part of like the Advent season, and it's part of the preparing. Like when people are putting up lights and everything, that's the preparation time. So I'm okay with it.
Yeah. It's interesting to think of how we actually have lots of little advents for these milestones. There's nothing else, and maybe that's part of what's spectacular and special and holy about this season is this. It matters so much. This arrival matters so much that we literally had another season of preparing. But we do this like whether it's I was designing my daughter's birthday party invitation. So much more time often is spent in the preparing, and maybe that's a little holy.
I think that's
and a
very
little
interesting.
special on this one.
I think it's something that we should take to heart, and that we should celebrate about what we have here in terms of our cultural heritage of preparing for Christmas and making such a big deal out of it. I know it's been overly commercialized and things like that. We can critique that, but we can also celebrate that people in all different traditions are preparing for this particular holiday. And
Truth.
that's just opportunities for us to preach the gospel, and also to celebrate gift giving, and celebrate being nice to one another and getting together with family, and just being in that holiday spirit. I think is something that is really special this time of year.
Amen. Sure is. Speaking of preparing, that's what we're talking about today. So as you maybe saw everybody in the title, that we're going to talk about how Jesus is coming to camp. And which means we have some things to get ready for. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today. That's our idea, is like, hey, Jesus is on his way. This arrival happens soon, and Jesus is going to come to camp on today's episode in a few different people within this story. So let's start there for a second, because we're gonna talk about these people. We at camp, we have these circles of influence. We have these audiences of impact. We have these different audiences that we connect to. We serve, are in partnership with. I got to talk about in my workshop a couple weeks ago, and again, we've talked on here before about how these audiences need intentionality around how we talk to them and how we prepare for them in whatever way they are, they're connecting to, serving, experiencing, whatever it is to camp. So what I want to do quickly is I want to talk about kind of, at least we're aligned in that most camps have some key audiences. And I'm going to talk about those in a second. I'm going to list them. And if you're taking notes and you want to, you can list them out and of course contextualize to you, to the ministries, the experience you have. But most camps are aligned in that we have these kind of buckets of audiences. Okay, here we go. So the first bucket is a bucket of participants. And that this consists of maybe a couple sub buckets of the kind of children and youth campers retreaters that we serve, and a bucket of kind of adult and other guests like that, campers that we serve. We got this bucket of participants, and connecting with them, speaking to them, building things for them. We spent a lot of time on this. Of course, these are incredibly key audiences because they are the key audiences that we serve. So there's one, participants is the big bucket there. Two is parents, right? Many of these campers, the youth ones obviously in particular, the parents are the ones we've talked before about how they're the ones making decisions. They're also the ones seeking information, et cetera, et cetera. So we've got this bucket of parents, and those are folks that we are both in partnership and influence. Staff is another audience, these staff that we're in partnership with that serve our camps, and we're also serving at the same time. Our board members is another audience, maybe a smaller bucket for lots of us, but obviously an incredibly key audience that also deserves intentionality. There's a bucket of donors and supporters. That's one of the audiences that we are again in partnership with, connect to, serve us, serve with us. Pastors and church leaders, that we are part of this ecosystem of faith formation, and those are key partners, key members of that ecosystem as well. And then there's another bucket of partners for lots of us. And maybe even increasingly, there's a bucket of partners with other organizations, other kinds of things. These might be some of the third-party things that offer a service to us, or that we might partner with for, a certain event, a certain experience, something like that. And then lastly, this bucket of influence around our community, right? Folks who, and maybe sometimes the interesting bucket of that one is they're not all connected to camp, at least not yet. But we need to remember that there is a group of folks that we are in community with that may not be connected yet. And especially if we're talking about marketing and things like that, we're looking to connect with some of those folks that don't know us yet. Okay, so there we go. There's some buckets of audience. The call to action here, everybody, is that you got to know your audiences, and they need to be broken down like that. And if you haven't written them down and tacked them up somewhere, or put in a note on your desktop, or on your bulletin board, write your audiences down. Write your circles of influence down. Because we have connection and influence with all those, and we want to do that intentionally.
Yeah.
So that's
it's
how we start.
Important to not just think of them now, but like in each of our communications and each of our ministries, how are we connecting to these different audiences? Because sometimes we get so focused on our direct participants, or maybe on our donors during a certain time of year, that we aren't always connecting with each of the audiences at the specific times that we really should be. And then we panic and say, oh, we got to connect and we got to do this with them. And so having a plan and being able to lay it out the way you suggest, I think, is super helpful.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to talk about, we're not going to go through all of those. Jesus isn't coming as every one of those today, but we've picked some of those that we found some interesting connection with, and we've got some prep to do for how Jesus is coming to camp in these. Before we do that, we are going to do our quick camp question.
Quick camp question.
Jay, quick camp question today. Your favorite camp skit?
My favorite camp skit? Oh, wow. There's so many good ones. Like, there's like the silly
ones. There's so
many
bad ones too.
Well, there's a lot of bad ones, right? But like, I love the ones that we come up with on the fly, and like, especially the ones that the campers come up with. Those are always my favorite when they're original. But in terms of like my favorite canned camp skits, I think my favorite like improv silly one is probably Waiting Room. I think that's a really fun one to do. But my favorite in terms of like as a message is another silly one. And this one is the Bucket Man skit. And we did this at Sugar Creek all the time. And it's these two characters that are kids, and they're playing superheroes, and they have like just buckets on their head. So it's Bucket Man and Bucket Boy. And they're trying to like help people, and they always mess it up, right? They like you always have these ridiculous scenarios that they're trying to help the person, but they do something that just causes more problems. And then they get frustrated and they think they're no good. And then there's a person that says, no, we need superheroes like you. We need people that are working to help in this world. And even if you don't have superpowers, you can't fly. put that bucket back on your head and get back out there in the world. And it's kind of a silly one, but also about like, what are the gifts that you have that you can bring to the world, and what kind of superhero are you? So anyway, that one's always a fun one. I enjoy being in that skit, and also the creativity that goes with it, and the message of using the gifts that God has given you. So how about you? What's your favorite camp skit?
I have a lot too. One of my favorite, similarly, like you find ways to be a little silly with it, but has a message, and coincidentally applies deeply to our day, right? Because
Well,
we
I
talk
knew you
about
were gonna.
Jesus.
I almost did this because it was like, oh, it fits with the theme, so I should just do
It's,
this. This is
here
also
we
one of my
are.
favorites. I know what you're
Right.
gonna say. Go ahead.
Right. So one of my favorites is called Jesus is Coming to Dinner,
Uh
right?
huh.
Which we took and tweaked a little bit and said Jesus is coming to camp. But the idea, it's a bit of a classic, I would say, that again is both silly, a chance for, counselors who love this sort of thing to make to be a little silly sometimes, but sometimes this one we've just gone kind of straight meaningful, like really tugged at some heartstrings, or we've done it. We did this for like closing programs at day camps and things like that, because it's a good one for that. So it's called Jesus is Coming to Dinner. Just in case you haven't done it, the idea is that there's somebody getting ready for Jesus to come to dinner. Jesus calls and says, "Hey, so and so, I'd like to come have dinner with you. I'm coming through town." And they say, "Of course, so great. Yes, you're welcome to come, Jesus. I'm not going to say no to Jesus." And starts getting ready, going nuts, preparing the house. And there's a knock at the door, and up comes a person who's in need of help. And this person, of course, would usually help, but Jesus is coming, so they can't help now. And this happens a couple different times with a couple different scenarios. And eventually, knock, 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 and it's Jesus. And Jesus is super late for dinner by this point, but the message, of course, the punchline is in with the scripture that talks about whatever you do for the least of these, you do for me.
In
And
Matthew.
Jesus
Yep.
says, "Actually, I've shown up. I've been here 3 times already, and you shut the door on me each of those times." And so that's one of my favorites. There we go. Quick
I
camp
like it.
question.
I like doing the positive version of it though. So the positive version is the exact same thing, except instead of turning them away, they say, "Oh, I guess come on in. I'm expecting somebody else, but you'll only be here for a little while." And then it ends up being this full house of people, and it's like all the food is gone, the house is messy.
Yes.
I'm not ready for Jesus. What's going to happen? And then they get the call that I'm already there. So
Yeah, I've arrived. So favorite skit? Put yours in the comments somewhere. All right, we we lobbed this softball, right? So the idea where we're gonna go here now is that Jesus is coming. Jesus is coming in the form of some of these different key audiences at camp. We're gonna talk about some of these. So Jesus is coming to camp, and the question is, what are we doing? What are we doing to prepare? How are we having ourselves an Advent preparation season for this arrival, for these important people? And remembering, really literally, not dissimilar to this skit, that Jesus comes in these people. Jesus enters our space with us. We claim that, we proclaim that, but Jesus is coming as a camper, and Jesus is coming as a camper parent, and Jesus is coming as a donor. And the hope is that this changes our perspective some on how we get ready.
yeah, absolutely.
We laid out those audiences. We've got that list of audiences. We're going to talk about 4 of those, and so we're going to start here. So we're going to talk about how Jesus enters our space. Jesus comes as a participant, as someone who's coming to our space to hear the gospel, to enjoy themselves. We'll talk about the why in just a second here. But Jesus is coming as one of our campers.
This is so helpful to really envision it this way, and it's helpful for our staff, I think, to help them see this
Uh-huh.
as how does it change our perspective when we say we're not just getting ready to, welcome these random people, but like that Jesus himself is coming in these different people, and we are going to encounter Jesus when we encounter these people at camp. That is a different perspective. And how does that change the way that we prepare our space and our hearts and minds for the people who are coming? One of the most practical examples I can think of is when we have challenging guests, whether that be an adult or whether that be a camper. I've heard so many times from camp counselors, oh, I got a problem camper this week. And that perspective is so poisonous. It's one of those perspectives that can really change the dynamics of a cabin. If I'm considering that, oh, if only this person wasn't here, this cabin group would bond so much better. These people would have a better
Hmm.
experience. We see this sometimes in parent surveys when they say,
Right.
oh, there was a high needs camper at camp. A lot of times, though, parents are under the perspective that, it was the staff that should have been more equipped to
Hmm.
deal with
Yep.
that
We saw that in
and to
parent
work
comments this
through some
summer.
of these challenges. They
Hmm.
didn't usually blame the child, right? But there are some times where the parents will even say, look, this child should have been sent home, things like that. And so how does it change our perspective when we think of each and every child as precious as Jesus himself coming to camp and being in our presence? I think that can really change our perspective and say, this isn't a problem child. This is Jesus coming to me in human form. And how do I accommodate? How do I preach to? How do I learn from? How do we all better become a community with this person in our presence? And it certainly changes the dynamics of a group, and it should. That's the other thing, is that a special individual child should change the dynamics, whether they're a high needs child or not. Um, they should have a voice in there. They should contribute in special and unique ways, and that does change the dynamic of a cabin group, and it can for very positive ways, as well as some things that we might say, well, this is challenging. And what we say at camp is, yes, it is, and you can do hard things. And we want to live that out in our cabin groups.
Truth. Yeah, we do say that. All right, so we found some as we are here in in Advent, and we are lots of us in our churches and in our homes. We're literally reading the story sometimes over and over again. As we talked about these different audiences, we thought about, we noticed some intersections with even key characters, players in
Absolutely.
this
Yeah.
Christmas story. So we're talking right now about how Jesus is coming as one of our participants.
Yeah. And so there's two things that I would think there's two characters that I would really go to during this Advent season as we think about preparing for these participants. One is the obvious camp counselor analog from the Bible, John the Baptist. We always hear about John the Baptist story during this time of year. How do we prepare the way for the coming of Jesus? And John the Baptist is out there doing it, right? He goes into the wilderness. He invites people out there. He dips them into this immersive experience. He calls them to account, all these things. So there's a little bit of fire and brimstone to the John the Baptist story, but there's also this compassion and this care and um, this intentionality to it, that's calling people out into the wilderness. And so I start with John the Baptist, kind of this eccentric guy. I call him the great camp counselor analog, because he's out in the wilderness. He's wearing these weird clothes. He's eating these weird things, right? Locusts and wild honey. And his main goal is not to say, "Look at me, look at how amazing I am," but to point the way, right? To prepare the way and say, "It's not about me. It's about the one coming after me, whose sandals I'm not even worthy to untie." Right? He's going to baptize you with the Holy Spirit. This is just water, but there's one coming. And so preparing the way is one of our big tasks at camp. And so how are we preparing the way for these campers to come and also immersing them in this experience and helping them see the one who is coming? The other one that I would use as an analog here is Elizabeth. Now Elizabeth, so most of these are going to be coming from the Gospel of Luke, because those of you who are following the lectionary, we're in the Luke cycle now with this new season of Advent. And so in the Gospel of Luke, after Mary gets the announcement from the angel Gabriel that she's going to have a child, the angel says, "And your cousin Elizabeth is also pregnant." And so Mary goes to visit Elizabeth. And when she does, and when she says hello to Elizabeth, what happens? The child within her leaps for joy.
Leaps.
Now, are we able to prepare ourselves so that when we hear the voice of the one who's coming to camp, we are leaping for joy and the children around us are leaping for joy. Those other campers in our care are leaping for joy. How are we welcoming that person in? This starts with the very first moment that these people come onto camp. When they come onto your property, how are they being welcomed? What's the hospitality that is greeting them? Are they being welcomed with the words, "Come to the waters," like John the Baptist? Are they being welcomed with that heart that leaps for joy at their presence? And then saying it out loud. As soon as I heard your voice, the child within me leapt for joy. What a beautiful gospel message, and a beautiful way of preparation for these participants that are coming to camp. And so preparing your heart, preparing your space, and being truly joyful and letting them know the joy that you have, that they are there when they arrive, but then throughout their experience there.
Yeah, amen. Okay, so this is helpful as we think about preparing for these participants, uh knowing the things the reasons they're coming, knowing their own motivations for opting in, for saying yes, is a really helpful thing. The things that they are hopeful
Totally.
for, that they are preparing themselves for, is helpful. And we know some about that, right? We have dug into some of that. We do it each summer
Absolutely.
with what we learned from effective camp and these other projects. So we know some things about their motivations for attending camp. So this is a good time to talk through about a couple of those, and I think we're gonna make that our stat of the week this week.
That of the week. That of the week. That of the week.
All right. Stat of the week this week. We're going to give you the numbers for why these campers say they are coming to camp. And this comes from more than 8,000 campers that have responded to our effective camp surveys. So this is a big data set, camps across the country. Why are campers motivated to come to camp? Why did they show up? We ask them this on the very first day at camp, right when they arrive. They take this survey and they tell us why they came to camp. The number one reason was, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. They come to camp to have fun. 92% agree with that statement, that I came to camp, at least in part, because I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Now, what's interesting is that second on that list is to learn more about God and grow in my faith. 81% of campers, 81% of the campers that come to our camps agree with the statement that I came to camp in part to learn more about God and grow in my faith. Second only to, I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
Fun and faith are the top two. And what's the third one? Well, the third one is another one of those words. It's friends. Fun, faith, and friends. To meet new people and make friends, 72% of folks agreed with that. Now, I want to say that there's a huge drop off in terms of like the number that agree with these statements. When it goes from fun to grow in faith, there's only a little bit of a drop off, but between growing in faith and making friends, it's 81% to 72% agreement. But in terms of strongly agree, it's over 50% that strongly agree they came to grow in their faith, and about 30% that strongly agree to make friends. And so a lot of them are kind of that somewhat agree. But those are the top three for motivations. And I think this helps us consider why and how we promote camp to these people, and why they're coming, and how we can really tell the story in a way that's compelling to them, and reminding ourselves and our counselors and other people that they're here for Jesus, right? They're here to have fun, right? They want to jump in the water, but they want to jump in particular water, right? They want to jump in the Jesus water. And so when we're John the Baptist and we're standing by the shore and we're saying, come to the waters, they're looking for that experience of God, and they're looking for that community that's around them. So keeping these things in mind can help us tell the story.
Yeah, that's the action step here, right? Is to check our storytelling, to check our brochures on our website and our things like that, and if either actually get some outside eyes and voices, or at least yourself, take a browse through those things, or have your marketing and comms folks take a browse through those things and go, if I'm a camper looking for this, does this meet that, show that, tell that story? Um, and then the other thing to do, and we talk about this with any of the research that we're doing, right? We want it to help tell the story, and then we want it to help us make informed decisions about programs and people. And those are the three things that data can help us do. We've talked about that a lot. Keep this stuff in kind of your pocket as you are continuing to program develop and as you're continuing to hire, right? Because you want to hire people who are on board to make this happen. And you want to create experiences or adjust experiences or tweak your experiences to maximize those three things: fun, faith, and friends. Thanks, Jake. All right, we got to move. We've been talking about Jesus is coming to camp as a participant, and that's one of the audiences. And
Yeah.
so that's one. Let's move. Let's move to talking about how Jesus is coming to camp as a parent.
Yeah. So here are biblical analogs here. There's several biblical analogs for how we are working to communicate with parents of the children that are coming to camp. I mean, the clearest one is the Annunciation, right? The message to Mary, the mother of Jesus: you are about to have a child. This is one of the beautiful Advent and Christmas messages that we get during this season, and her response: "Here am I, the handmaiden of the Lord," right? But there's some questions in there, right? She doesn't just say that right away. She says, "How can this be?" Right? She's asking questions, and so knowing that there's going to be this dialogue, and there's going to be this give and take a little bit, and Gabriel doesn't get upset and leave, right? He answers the questions, right? How is this going to be? Well, the Holy Spirit's going to come upon you, right? And the power of the Most High will overshadow you. So there's these answers that we know by heart because we've been to so many Christmas pageants, but to really remember them and to dig deep into these things and say, this questioning is an okay thing, right? It's not something that people just assume that this is a good thing to send my child to camp. They have serious questions about this. Is my child going to be safe? How can this be? What's going to happen? And so being able to answer those questions and being patient about answering those questions and answering them honestly is really important. And so I find the Annunciation very compelling, and also the hope of Mary. And so one of the favorite biblical passages, not just in Advent, but in the whole Bible, is the Magnificat. My soul proclaims your greatness, O God, right? And this song of praise that Mary has after she visits her cousin Elizabeth in Luke, and the prophecy of what this child is going to become, remembering that in these children that are coming to your camps, the hopes and dreams of these parents are tied up, right? And the hopes and dreams of the world. Like when Mary's talking about it, she's talking about the mighty being cast down from their thrones, right? And lifting up the lowly and all these things that Jesus has come to do. It's this beautiful, beautiful song. But remembering that in the hearts of every mother, in the hearts of every father, is this desire for their child to live into their mission in this world, and for their child to do great things. And so being able to walk alongside them in that and say, we have these wonderful programs for your child. We have these wonderful plans. This is how we're going to take care of your child. Things like that becomes really, really important in the messaging. But also, not just that, like, how are you going to empower this child? What is this child going to do? And so the second analog that I would actually use also comes from the Gospel of Luke, Luke chapter 2. And this is usually in the Christmas text, not in the Advent text. So we'll probably hear it the first Sunday after Christmas. Is the Simeon and Anna at the temple. When Joseph and Mary bring Jesus and present him at the temple for circumcision, there's this old guy there and this old lady, and they've been there for decades. And Simeon is like almost blind, and he gets to finally, at the end of his life, behold the salvation of Israel, he said. So he's got that famous song, now, O Lord, your servant can depart in peace, right? Because I have seen the salvation of Israel. And so there's this expectation, and he makes this prophecy about this child doing great things, but also this warning to Mary, and a sword shall pierce your heart, right? So he's got these prophecies about who Jesus is and who he will grow to be, and the challenges of being a parent. And knowing that there's these challenges is something that we as camp directors and camp supporters can learn from some of these biblical stories and say, okay, what does this mean as we try to communicate with parents? Certainly, we don't want to say to them, a sword shall pierce your heart. But knowing that parenting is flat out hard and these folks need help.
Yep.
And we can bring people
And
alongside them and
encouragement.
say, we are here for you to help lift up your child as Simeon and Anna lifted up the baby Jesus, and to support them in their development and to support you as a parent so that when there's this heartache, because there's going to be heartache, a sword will pierce your heart, moms and dads. How can we walk alongside you and support you so that you are prepared and empowered to walk with your children through those difficult times? And those difficult times as a parent when, you know, fast forwarding a little bit in the Gospel of Luke, when
Mhm.
the boy Jesus ditches them and goes and hangs out at the temple, and they end up like 2 days away from Jerusalem.
Peace,
Where's
Ma.
Jesus, right? Like, dang that kid.
Right.
Um,
It's yeah, you're right. When it actually is a pretty significant perspective shift on how we see those parents when we see them as uh, as partners, as folks that we don't need something from, but we can both do something for, and most importantly, do something with. We see them as
yeah,
partners for sake of
yep,
this child.
you got it. This child is special. We see this child as special, as unique, as someone that we want to help thrive, and knowing that the parent is the partner in that, and that the parent has a deep stake in this. And when we make these announcements to them about why their child should come to camp, having these things in mind is really important. You know, that
Yeah,
their
our
child's going to be
service.
safe, and
Mhm.
that God has something special in mind for this child, and we're going to help this child find it, and we're going to help you. We're going to come alongside you as a parent.
Yeah, our service to, and again, service with, but service to this parents didn't stop when we got their registration. And sometimes we still go, oh, that was the goal. We did it. We hit it. Right. So,
Yep.
okay.
And we sometimes see
Um,
parents as meddling, right? And we want to see them as partners, you
right.
know,
We have to do
even
this for them.
when
We
there's
have to,
challenging home
right.
situations. Even when there's challenging home
Yeah.
situations, how
Yep.
can we help and empower these parents as well?
All right. So Jesus showed up as a participant, camper participant. Jesus showed up as a parent. Jesus shows up in our community as a fellow leader, as a church leader and pastor. Again, someone we, I've talked plenty about how we're in partnership with, but Jesus is coming to camp as a pastor and church leader.
You know, sometimes when I was at camp as a counselor and church leaders would come, I would sort of see them as antagonistic, like I want to do the ministry here.
Or at least they're
And
watching over you. They had
yeah,
that
and
kind
I
of,
felt like I'm being critiqued, and sometimes I was, probably
yeah,
rightly so. But you know, I wanted to do things on my own and things like that. But recognizing them as Jesus as well. You know, like Jesus coming in this camper, Jesus is coming in
yep,
these parents, Jesus is
exactly.
coming in these church leaders as well to serve, to come alongside us, to empower us, and it's okay that if they ask for accountability, but also like they have needs too. They have a desire to be involved in these kids' lives, and a lot of times these pastors, like, this is their chance to connect with these young people. They don't always have time and space to do that. So providing that time and space at camp, I think, is a good perspective shift. And how can I help connect this pastor, this church leader, this youth minister, this volunteer or mentor? How can I help connect them to this experience and help them feel empowered? And helping our staff understand that, our counselors understand that, is really, really important. Um, Sometimes it can be eye-opening, right? And so
Hmm.
the biblical story that I think of is, again, from the Gospel of Luke. It's Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist, who gets this message from the angel, as he's serving in the temple, right? He's a priest. He's serving in the temple, and he gets this vision and this message that he's going to have a son, and he's going to name him John, which is not a family name. And he kind of scoffs at this and doesn't believe the message. And and because of that, he's struck dumb, right? He can't speak
Right.
until
Right.
after the child John is named. He actually has to write it down on a piece of paper saying, "Yes, his name is John." After John is named. It's an interesting
Hmm.
story in the Bible, um, but this belief and this understanding that this person is coming alongside of us and is an important minister in this process. We don't want to be overlooking the importance of church leaders, because they are the very ministers that are in these child's lives for oftentimes long periods of time. And so recognizing them as fellow ministers, recognizing them as Jesus themselves, and that they have a voice, and to not take that
Hmm.
voice away.
Yeah. Amen. There's 3. Audience, at least for today. Audience number 4. That Jesus is coming to camp as. Jesus is coming into our space, joining us at camp as a donor and supporter.
Yeah, yeah. So this one, what's interesting here is some of these folks don't even come to camp, right?
Yeah.
They hear about it.
Yes.
They
Yeah.
hear the story, and
Yeah.
some of them make the journey, and some of them make the journey for a donor dinner or an auction or something like that. But these are so important to our ministry, and we understand this conceptually. But how are we working with these folks? How are we treating these folks? How are we making sure that they feel welcome at camp? That this is their space? How can we help them have the experience? Because they're not having the same experience as the campers or as the parents. They're not
Right.
getting their hearts pierced in the same way as a mother of a child, or they're not being struck dumb in the same way as a pastor at the sight of the living God, and they're not necessarily being welcomed down to the waters and jumping in and participating like the campers and the other participants. And so how are these folks participating and welcome to come alongside? How are we telling the story to these folks? um, these folks are following us for a variety of reasons. Some of them had their own experiences at camp years ago, and some of them are hopeful and have
Hmm.
this expectation and this dream that something can be better, that they can have an influence on somebody else's life. And that's this beautiful thing about walking with a donor who wants to support a cause that's worthwhile. And you're trying to tell the story to these folks. How are you able to tell the story in a way that they're bringing their finest gifts? Of course, the biblical analogy is the Magi from the East, who aren't even from the same country, right? They hear of something great.
Yeah. They're not
They
having the
see the
same
signs
experience.
that something great is happening. And I've heard so many stories about donors that, they saw something, or they heard somebody mention camp as this way that influenced their lives. And they're like, that's something I want to give to. And these people
Hmm.
that you've never even heard from, they come into your land and say, here, take my gold. It's amazing. And so
Yeah.
so how are we telling the story in such a way that they're bringing their finest gifts? And how are we walking alongside them and not making them feel, you know, totally kicked out of the country as King Herod did, right? In seeking for them and trying to follow them and trying to use them to attack the baby Jesus. But how are we being welcoming to them? Um, the other analog that I would offer biblically is Theophilus. This is kind of an obscure one, but if you read Luke chapter 1, verse 1, it's addressed. The book of Luke and the book of Acts are addressed to Theophilus, most excellent Theophilus.
Hmm.
And some scholars think that he's a patron, somebody that either helped Luke or Paul in their ministries, or maybe paid for the composition of the gospel itself. And so this idea that Luke is bringing together this orderly account. I'm bringing together an orderly account of what
Yep.
happened. I'm telling the story in such a way that can be compelling to you, most excellent Theophilus, right? And so how are we telling the story and making sure that we're telling it in a way that is compelling to the donors? That's a way to treat them as Jesus himself.
I don't know if I knew Theophilus was an investor potentially, right? An investor in the story, an investor in the kingdom. And sometimes even that term, thinks about it because they are so convinced that something great can and will happen. Right? That's where we want to be. That's where we want them feeling, not giving out of, or gone are the days of giving out of it's just what we do. Gone are the days of giving out of obligation. these next generations, especially of donors, are not going to give because of that. Right? They're going to give on purpose. They're going to give to and volunteer for, right? And I mean, it's not just dollars. Yes, they're going to give to, volunteer for, give time to, advocate for places that and people that they have confidence in and trust in and can see great things for. Yeah.
Address it to them, right? Address it to them and call them what Luke called them. Theophilus means friend of God, beloved of God. So, beloved of God, you who are beloved of God, Theophilus, I present this to you, this account of the gospel and the way that God is working in this world and at this camp. And
Amen. Yeah.
We appreciate who you are and what you are able to give to this amazing ministry.
All right, people, Jesus is coming to camp. These are a few of the ways. Again, we've got these other audiences, these circles of influence, these different perspectives that people are connecting with us for. So, hey, maybe you found a really great one, a really great analog, like Jake did here to someone in the story. That'd be really fun to hear. Jake, this is our Advent and Christmas episode. So say Merry Christmas to our faithful listeners.
Friends, Jesus is coming. Prepare the way. Happy Advent, Merry Christmas. Spread that Christmas joy and the joy of the coming of the Christ child to all those you meet.
Merry Christmas, friends. See you soon. Thanks for listening to the Sacred Playgrounds podcast. Thanks for listening to the Sacred Playgrounds podcast. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/sacredplaygrounds or at Sacred Playgrounds on Instagram. Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you're getting this podcast. And if you like this content and it's helpful, you can support the podcast by clicking that support button. Our theme music was written and performed by Taylor Wilson. You can find all his original songs wherever you get your music. Learn more about what we're up to and connect with the team at sacredplaygrounds.com.